So the first question I have is, if you read enough design books, you inevitably come across the famous quote by the legendary former head of IBM, Thomas Watson, good design is good business. And the first question I have is, given sort of the current global economic condition, what's the relevance today of that type of idea?
Well, Watson always qualified that quote, good design is good business. He says later on in the same essay, in which he formally says good design is good business, he says that a good design will help a good product succeed faster,
Right.
and it'll help a bad product fail faster. And I think that's correct. I think there are plenty of instances of beautifully designed things that had flawed business plans behind them, or just for other reasons, had problems that end up failing. There are a few well-designed things that sort of succeed in spite of themselves, I think, for a while at least. And it's when the two things come together that I think that things do pretty well. So nowadays, I think if good design means that things feel transparent and easy to use,
Yeah.
if they feel inviting to people,
Mm-hmm.
if they're delivering a kind of sense of authenticity and integrity, I think all of those things are positive attributes. And I think what we've seen lately, and this is Watson in a way was working in the 50s, was at the forefront of a movement in America that had to do with bringing good design to common everyday objects, and sort of enlarging it from the idea that design was something that only signified luxury, was something that only meant higher cost. And I think you see today, the Targets of the world
Right.
demonstrating that you can kind of use design as a way to democratize the marketplace as well.
Right. So good design is accessible to everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And the other thing I was going to ask was the state, given the state of the economy again, some people have talked about, compared, especially with looking at unemployment rates, compared today to like the early 80s, and it was kind of hovering close to double-digit unemployment
Right.
rate. And that being sort of, I guess, an earlier point in your career. So going back then, you had to sort of deal with how to make design work in that type of climate. What lessons did you learn back then that maybe have helped you or have been relevant today, given the situation?
Well, I started my career. I moved to New York in June 1980,
Mm-hmm.
and when you hear people say it's the worst economy in 28, 29 years, they're talking about the early 80s basically, where there were 25% interest rates and 12, 13, 14% unemployment in some
Mm-hmm.
places. So it really was a terrible economy. However, I was right out of college. I was lucky enough to find a job. My wife had to look for 9 or 10 months before she found one.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was feeling the brunt of the economy. But I had a job that I was making, $12,500 a year at, and I just couldn't have been happier. It was a dream job for me. And we, we ate lettuce sandwiches, and I was very happy. We lived in this squalid, cockroach-filled apartment. Went out to eat a hamburger once a week, and I didn't feel poor. I felt perfectly happy. And I've got a daughter now who's just graduated from college last year, has a job, but shares an apartment smaller than the one that I shared with my wife, with 3 roommates. That's just as squalid as anything I did, and she's happy too, because when you're young, you don't really know. It's there were subsequent recessions that I became more and more acquainted with as they went on. The one in the early '90s, the one that kind of followed the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
And those, I think, are the same thing happens every single time.
Right.
And it's just the flip side of what happens when times are good. And I think the delusion that we all have is that we think that the boom is the normal situation,
Right.
and the recession is some sort of gruesome aberration. And instead, they're both just different sides of the same cycle.
Right.
So, in boom times, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but I had clients saying, can we pay you in advance for this job because we need to, our accountants say we have to get this off our books, so for tax reasons. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd get paid, a lot of money in advance for work I hadn't done yet, and then sometimes they sort of seem to even forget they had paid me to do that, I mean, and I thought, well, this is a nice way to make money. But then I eventually did have to do all that work, by the way. And so you think, wow, this is swell, I'm a genius, right? And then in a recession, it's the same thing that happens to anyone out there happens to me and my partners at Pentagram. Everything is more competitive.
Right.
Your prices all have to be really tight if you hope to get the work, even if they say, congratulations, you got the job. Here's the catch. You have to make it a little bit cheaper. You get the job for a little bit cheaper, then it takes a while to start up. They keep delaying it. Then once it does start up, it takes longer because a lot of people get involved because they have to show up at the meeting, so no one would think that they're not busy and fire them. So a lot of people are getting involved and pitching in and mucking things up and making you do it 5 times in a row. So it's harder to work efficiently when things are going so slow. Then finally you finish it, you submit your invoices, they dispute the invoices, and then finally you say, where's the check? And they say it's in the mail.
Beyond sort of the cyclical nature of the economy and things like that, it seems like today design is taken a lot more serious by the business community. And I say that, based on the amount of coverage you see in various business publications, Fast Company, Inc., and Business Week, whatever. Do you think we're sort of at a turning point in design's relation to business, or is this sort of like a flash in the pan?
It's interesting, is I think that the reason that design is covered in these magazines, I think has less to do with anyone in the business community getting more serious about design, but it has to do with those other things that all of us know have happened in the last 10 years or 15 years, which is the rise of personal computers and desktop publishing, just the simple access that everyone who has a personal computer has to a bunch of different fonts and layout programs and stuff like that. All of those things have just made, specifically graphic design issues all of a sudden more meaningful to people's lives, right? And so I think then, a writer like Bruce Nussbaum in Business Week has even more that he can, he has more he can write about just because design somehow seems to be more interesting to more people. I mean, there was a time, again, when, Thomas Watson and those guys in the 50s aside, there was a time as recently as the 70s and early 80s when design was still something you could buy at the Museum of Modern Art bookstore, or the Museum of Modern Art, gift shop. And if you were looking for a well-designed object, you had to pay a premium for it. Now I think it's much more accessible. People know the names of, a surprising number of people know the names of architects like Michael Graves or Frank Gehry, or designers like Philippe Starck or people like that. And I think the turning point for design may have been when a bunch of bloggers and other regular civilian people made Tropicana change their packaging back from the Peter Arnell design to the Sterling Brands design. There would have been a time in American life where if someone would have said, if you were talking to your next door neighbor and he would have said, geez, what do you think of that new orange juice package? And you'd say, well, what do you mean, Bob? And he'd say, well, you notice it's changed? So, well, I can't say I did, Bob. Why are you talking about it? And then he'd say, well, I'm going to write a letter to the chairman because I don't like it. Oh, really? And he'd sort of think, well, honey, I think something's wrong with Bob. He's like really obsessing about orange juice packaging. And now it's sort of considered everyone's like birthright to sort of like comment on those things.
People get up in arms about it.
Get up in arms about it. So I think people are across the board much more conscious of design and the role it plays in their everyday lives, and I think that's actually at the end of the day a positive thing, And I think it sort of is it'll be a challenge, I think, for the business community to understand how you market a product or produce a message in an environment where everyone is so conscious like that.